It started like any normal weekday. My wife had just pulled into our driveway after picking up some groceries and running errands. She was tired, the kind of tired you can see on someone's face even from inside the house. I watched from the window as she carefully backed the truck into the same spot we always parked it. Nothing was blocking the road, nothing illegal about it. It was our property, our space, and she was just trying to unload the bags without making 2 trips. Then I saw them, 2 HOA enforcers walking fast across the street, like they were hunting for a reason to argue. They weren't smiling. No clipboard. No warning. Just straight-up attitude. You can always tell when someone shows up already angry. They didn't even glance at the license plate or take a picture. They just marched up to her and started yelling about the truck. One of them, a tall guy with sunglasses too big for his face, pointed at the company logo on the truck door. "Commercial vehicles can't park in driveways," he snapped. My wife tried to explain that she lived here, that it was our truck, and that she was just unloading groceries. But they weren't listening. Not even a little. She asked them calmly if they could point out where the violation was. That seemed to trigger them even more. The second guy, shorter, stockier, started moving closer, way too close for comfort. "Don't get smart with us," he barked. And before she could even step back, he shoved her back toward the truck. I was already halfway out the door by then. It all happened so fast. She stumbled, caught herself on the mirror, and looked stunned. Not hurt, not yet, but definitely shocked. These weren't police officers. These were HOA patrol wannabes, the kind who think a clipboard gives them real authority. No badge. No training. Just power-hungry residents with too much time and zero patience. From the porch, I could hear the taller one shouting something about fines, citations, and calling a tow truck. I didn't care. I was seeing red. But I didn't run. I didn't yell. I just walked toward them, steady and silent. And the moment they saw me, something changed. I wasn't wearing civilian clothes. I had just gotten home from my shift, still in full uniform. The name tag, the badge. The weight of everything I carried suddenly made them both freeze. Like someone had pressed pause on their little HOA power trip. The shorter one took a step back. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tall guy's sunglasses slipped a little, and I could see his eyes. Fear. Plain and simple. That kind of fear you only see when someone realizes they messed up in a big way. I didn't have to say a word. My wife stood up straight and wiped her hands on her jeans, like she just remembered who she was and what she didn't deserve to deal with. She walked over to me, stood by my side. Still silent. The taller enforcer mumbled something about misunderstanding and started backing away. The other guy nodded like he agreed, even though 2 minutes ago he was barking orders and putting his hands on her. Now he looked like he couldn't get away fast enough. I kept walking toward them. Not fast, not threatening. Just letting the silence work. I could hear my boots hitting the pavement. It was the only sound for a few seconds. But it was enough. One of them tripped on the curb backing up, and that was when I saw the fear become embarrassment. They weren't just scared of getting in trouble anymore. They were humiliated. And they should have been. My wife wasn't doing anything wrong. Not one thing. And they made it into a scene, a conflict, a violation where there wasn't one. It wasn't about the truck. Not really. It was about control. The HOA had created an environment where neighbors patrol neighbors, where a pickup truck can turn into a crime scene if someone doesn't like the color of your bumper sticker. They thought they had power. They thought we'd just accept it. But they didn't expect me to be in uniform. They didn't expect me to walk up with the calmness of someone who's seen real threats, who's dealt with situations far more serious than an HOA argument over a truck. My presence alone made their little charade collapse. But I wasn't there to intimidate. I just wanted to know why these 2 men thought they could lay hands on my wife. I asked them, plain and simple, "Who gave you the authority to touch her?" The taller one stuttered. He looked at the other guy, like maybe he'd suddenly become the spokesperson. But there was no answer. Just a weak, mumbled, "We were enforcing community rules." I asked again, louder this time, "Community rules say you can put your hands on someone?" Still no answer. They were stuck. You could tell they didn't know what to do next. These weren't people trained to de-escalate. They were people used to winning arguments by yelling louder, But not today. Not with me standing there. Not with my wife brushing off her sleeves, standing tall next to me. A few neighbors had started to gather nearby. Some were pretending to check their mail, others just watching from behind their curtains. It's funny how quiet a street can get when something like this is going down. Suddenly, everyone who usually minded their own business became an audience. That's when the shorter guy tried to flip the story. She was being uncooperative, he said. I took a step closer. Uncooperative isn't illegal. Grabbing someone? That is. He took a step back again. The other one pulled out his phone, probably thinking he could report something or spin a new version before the police showed up. Too late for that. My wife had already called them the moment she got shoved. She wasn't just standing there anymore, she was recording. Phone out, camera on, pointed right at their faces. And let me tell you something, there's nothing more effective than a calm woman with a camera when someone knows they're in the wrong. The taller enforcer told her to stop filming. Said it was against policy. That's when she laughed. Out loud. You're not the police. And this is our property, she said. You could feel the confidence shift. 1 minute earlier, these guys were storming up our driveway like they owned the block. Now they were cornered by facts, by the law, by their own stupidity. And they still didn't understand how fast everything had turned against them. Then we heard the sirens. 2 squad cars rolled up slow, not in a hurry, more like they were just here to document whatever was left of this little disaster. The officers stepped out. I recognized one of them. He nodded at me. We'd worked a joint task force together a few months back. He didn't even ask for details at first. Just looked at my wife and said, "You all right?" She nodded, but you could tell she was still shaking inside. Not because of fear, but because of how sudden it all was. 1 second you're unloading groceries, the next you're shoved against your truck by some guy with a clipboard and a complex. The HOA enforcers tried to talk over each other. Excuses. Backpedaling. One of them even said he thought she was trespassing. On her own driveway. The officer didn't even respond to that. He just walked past them, toward me and my wife. Want to file a report? He asked her. She looked at me, then at the camera still rolling in her hand. Yes, she said. Yes, I do. The enforcers' faces turned pale. You could tell they weren't used to consequences. Not here. Not in this neighborhood where they usually got away with acting like mini dictators. The officers asked them to wait near the curb. One of them started talking about the HOA board and how they had permission to enforce violations. The cop shut it down fast. Enforce doesn't mean assault, he said. And it sure doesn't mean touching anyone. That line stuck with me. Because that's what it comes down to. These people blur the line between rules and rights. They hide behind regulations and forget that they don't have power over people, they just have guidelines written in a booklet most residents throw away after moving in. And now, for the first time, they were learning that the rules don't protect you when you cross the line. As the officer continued gathering statements, the 2 HOA enforcers stood awkwardly near the curb, suddenly much quieter than before. Their swagger had completely disappeared. The shorter one kept glancing toward the patrol cars, probably wondering how fast this was going to escalate, or if someone higher up in the HOA was going to magically appear and bail them out. But no one came. My wife gave her statement first. She was calm but firm. She explained every detail from the moment she parked the truck to the second she felt herself shoved against the side mirror. Her voice didn't shake once. Watching her tell the story like that, clear and controlled, made me realize just how strong she really was. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She wasn't looking for drama. She just wanted accountability. When it was my turn, I stuck to the facts. I told the officer what I saw, how fast the situation turned, and how the 2 men ignored every opportunity to de-escalate. I didn't add anything extra. I didn't need to. The video spoke for itself, and the officers had already watched part of it. The officers called in a supervisor. When he arrived, the scene turned even more official. Badges out, notebooks in hand. They asked for HOA identification from both enforcers. And here's the thing. Turns out, only one of them was officially listed as a compliance volunteer. The other? Just some guy who helped out and claimed to be part of the neighborhood watch. The supervisor raised an eyebrow. So you're not actually authorized to interact with residents? The guy fumbled. Well, I work with him. I've been doing this for months. But no ID. No certification. No permission, the officer confirmed. That changed everything. What they did before was bad enough. But now it wasn't just aggression, it was impersonation. The guy wasn't even legally allowed to speak for the HOA, let alone walk onto our property and start issuing orders. The shorter one tried to deflect again. We've been getting complaints about this truck for weeks. It's against policy. People say it looks unprofessional. The supervisor didn't budge. Complaints don't give you the right to use force. They were caught, plain and simple. The mood had shifted entirely. Neighbors who had quietly watched earlier were now stepping outside, walking their dogs a little slower, pretending to stretch on the sidewalk, all of them curious, all of them watching. One woman even shouted from her porch, "About time someone stood up to them." That told me a lot. We weren't the first people they had harassed. Just the first ones who didn't stay quiet about it. Eventually, the officers took full statements from both HOA enforcers and informed them they'd be forwarding everything to the city attorney. Whether charges would stick or not, it was no longer just a neighborhood problem. This was going on official record. After the reports were wrapped up, the officers asked my wife if she needed medical attention. She said no, but they still wrote it up as a physical altercation. One of the officers quietly told us that the HOA might try to settle things behind closed doors to avoid legal action. But don't let them pressure you, he added. This happens more than people realize. You did the right thing recording it. As the patrol cars pulled away, I looked over at the two enforcers. They wouldn't even make eye contact. The fake volunteer was now standing off to the side like he wasn't part of anything. And the taller one? His hands were in his pockets, his face red, his entire vibe deflated. My wife stood beside me the whole time, arms crossed, steady as a rock. No tears, no yelling. Just the same strength she showed when she refused to back down. We walked back to the house slowly. The truck was still there, parked exactly where it had been since the beginning. Not a single inch out of place. And now it was more than just a vehicle. It had become the proof of everything that went wrong that day, and everything that wasn't going to be tolerated anymore. The next day, the HOA sent an email to every homeowner in the neighborhood. It had no apology, no acknowledgement of what happened, just a bland, carefully worded message about a misunderstanding involving compliance officers and a reminder to respect community parking policies. No mention of the incident. No mention of the fact that one of their so-called enforcers wasn't even officially registered. And definitely no mention of the part where they put hands on my wife. What they didn't realize was how fast news travels in a neighborhood like ours. Everyone already knew. The video had been shared in private Facebook groups, text threads, and even made it onto the community next door page. One neighbor commented, "They finally messed with the wrong people." Another added, "We've all had enough of the clipboard cowboys." I didn't respond publicly. Neither did my wife. We didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. The uniform said enough. But behind the scenes, we weren't done. A few homeowners started calling us, asking what really happened. When we told them, most were shocked but not surprised. Turns out, this wasn't the first time the HOA's compliance crew had crossed a line. One neighbor said they had walked into his open garage to take pictures without asking. Another said they tried to cite her for a non-regulation mailbox that had been there since the home was built. Most people hadn't fought back because they didn't want trouble. But now, the silence was breaking. By the end of the week, a group of homeowners had organized a private meeting, no board members invited. We met at someone's backyard patio, just a handful of chairs and some cold lemonade, but the energy was serious. People were tired. Not just of fines and warnings, but of being treated like tenants on their own land. They started sharing stories, comparing letters, even pulling out photos of strange citations they'd received. And every time someone asked, "Is that even legal?" the room got a little quieter. That's when one of the neighbors, a retired attorney, offered to take a look at the HOA bylaws. He said he'd seen this kind of overreach before, especially in smaller communities where the board thinks no one will push back. He promised to read through the documents and check for any inconsistencies, illegal clauses, or outdated rules being misused. Within days, we had answers. The bylaws did mention parking restrictions, yes. But they were vague. And more importantly, they didn't authorize the board to assign physical enforcement roles to unlicensed residents. Volunteers could observe and report, not confront, not intimidate, and definitely not touch anyone. That one finding changed everything. We printed the documents, highlighted key sections, and planned to bring it all to the next HOA meeting. But this time, we weren't going to sit quietly in folding chairs while the board read off boring financial reports. This time, we were bringing witnesses, evidence, and a growing list of residents ready to speak out. Meanwhile, the two enforcers had gone silent. No more walking the streets with clipboards. No more patrols. We heard whispers that one had resigned from the board altogether, trying to avoid the heat. The other one? Apparently under review. Whatever that meant. But what mattered more was how people were changing. The same neighbors who used to avoid speaking up were now sending emails, raising concerns, even talking about starting a recall vote. What had once been a passive, rule-following community had started to wake up. And the board felt it. You could tell from the sudden shift in their tone. A new notice went out saying they were re-evaluating enforcement procedures. They asked for feedback from homeowners and said they were committed to maintaining a respectful environment. Too late for empty words. The damage was done. But it wasn't all bad. Because something else had been built in the process: trust. Not in the HOA, but between neighbors. People started waving again, talking more at the mailbox, checking in on each other. It was like everyone finally realized they weren't alone in their frustration. And in a strange way, that shove against the truck, something so unnecessary and ugly, ended up being the moment this neighborhood finally found its voice. The day of the HOA meeting finally arrived. It was held in the usual place, the community clubhouse near the front entrance. Normally, these meetings were quiet, half-empty, with maybe a few people asking about pool repairs or landscaping. But not this time. We got there 10 minutes early, and the room was already packed. People stood against the walls, filled every chair, some even waited outside the open doors. You could feel it. This wasn't going to be business as usual. The board members sat at their long folding table, papers stacked neatly, faces stiff. They knew something was coming. And so did we. My wife sat beside me, the video loaded on her phone. We weren't sure if we'd need to play it, but it was ready, just in case someone tried to deny anything. Around us, neighbors we barely knew nodded, whispered encouragement, even thanked us for coming. One woman leaned in and said, "They've been getting away with this stuff for years. It's time someone stood up." The meeting started like it always did: approval of the last meeting's minutes, budget notes, a quick update on the clubhouse plumbing. But the board couldn't avoid it forever. And when they opened the floor for community concerns, half the room raised their hands at once. The first man stood up, calm but firm. "I've lived here 9 years, he said, and I've never seen an HOA enforcer touch a resident. That's assault. Whether you want to call it a misunderstanding or not." The board president tried to respond. "We understand emotions are high, but we're currently reviewing." He didn't even get to finish. Someone else stood up. Then another. People weren't waiting for permission anymore. They took turns sharing their stories: unfair citations, threats of fines, notices stuck to front doors like warnings. One neighbor said she was written up for a garden gnome. Another was threatened with a lien over a missing trash bin lid. It sounded ridiculous, but to them, it had become normal. And then my wife stood up. The room got quiet fast. No one interrupted. She spoke clearly, no anger in her voice, just steady truth. She described what happened that day: the shouting, the shove, the way both men acted like they were above the law. She didn't show the video. She didn't need to. Her words were strong enough. And when she finished, the silence said more than any speech could. Then it was my turn. I didn't give a speech either. I just asked the board a single question: what's stopping this from happening again? They didn't answer. Not right away. One of the members finally leaned into his microphone. He looked nervous. "We're in the process of drafting a new enforcement policy with legal input, and possibly adding body cameras. Body cameras? That got a few snorts from the back of the room. People didn't want more gear or tech. They wanted accountability. They wanted rules that worked for everyone, not just the ones handing out warnings. I held up the printout of the bylaws. This already says what your volunteers can and can't do. You ignored it. That's the problem, not the lack of equipment. That moment cracked something open. A woman near the window stood up and asked about removing current board members. A guy next to her asked how to call for a vote. Someone else said the neighborhood needed a community committee, not just the board, to review policies before they got enforced. Ideas flew fast, louder and bolder than anyone expected. The board tried to keep control, but it was too late. The people in that room weren't asking anymore. They were deciding. They were organizing. And the board knew it. You could see it in their posture, in their quick glances at one another. No one stormed out. No one shouted. But the power in that room had shifted. Completely. The board promised to schedule a special vote. Promised to freeze all enforcement actions until after that vote. Promised to hold an open discussion with legal counsel present. And those promises, spoken under pressure, under watch, meant more than any HOA notice ever had. Because for once, it wasn't a board deciding behind closed doors. It was the neighborhood, awake at last. Over the next few days, everything in the neighborhood felt different. The HOA bulletin board, the one near the clubhouse that most people used to ignore, became the center of attention. Someone had posted a large printout of the HOA bylaws, highlighted and stapled right in the middle. A handwritten note underneath said, "Know your rights, they're counting on you not to." It stayed up for 2 days before someone on the board took it down. But by then it didn't matter. Copies had already been made. Screenshots were flying around group chats. People were finally paying attention. And they weren't afraid to talk about it anymore. The neighbors who used to wave politely and go inside were now stopping to chat in driveways, asking each other questions, sharing advice, making plans. You could hear snippets of conversations while walking down the street. Did they fine you for that? I filed a complaint yesterday. We should go together next time. My wife and I were out front one evening, just watering the plants, when a teenager from a few houses down rode up on his bike. He pointed at our truck and asked, "Is that the one from the video?" I nodded. He looked impressed. "My dad showed me. He said your wife's a legend now." Then he rode off like nothing had happened. It was strange, but also kind of hopeful. The story had taken on a life of its own. And not just because of the uniform or the video, but because it gave people permission to stop pretending things were okay when they clearly weren't. One morning we got a letter from the HOA. This time, it was personal, not a form notice, not folded like a flyer. It was hand-delivered in an envelope, addressed just to us. Inside was a formal letter from the board president. The wording was cautious. He said the HOA deeply regrets any distress caused, and that they were committed to improving training and accountability for all volunteers. He stopped short of using the word apology. But he did invite us to join a new policy oversight committee, a group that would include board members and residents alike. I read the letter twice, then handed it to my wife. She read it once and shook her head. "They're not doing this because they care," she said. "They're doing it because they're scared." She wasn't wrong. But we also knew this was an opportunity. Maybe it wasn't the apology we wanted, but it was a door opening, and if we didn't walk through it, someone else would. So we agreed to attend the first committee meeting. It was set for the following week, and the invitation list was short, only 5 homeowners, 3 board members, and 1 outside attorney the HOA had hired to guide them through the storm. That meeting was nothing like the ones before. No folding tables, no microphones. Just a circle of chairs in the clubhouse, coffee in paper cups, and a giant dry erase board that no one wanted to write on at first. They asked us how enforcement should look, what rules felt fair, what consequences should exist for violations, and for abuse of power. They even asked what kind of training should be required before someone could be sent out to confront residents. That question alone sparked a long debate. I told them if someone's going to knock on my door and quote rules, they should at least know the law. Real training. Not just a name badge and a list of what the grass height should be. Others agreed. A mother spoke up about how the enforcers once told her son, who was home alone, that his basketball hoop was a security hazard. She said he was scared to go outside for 2 days. One by one, people told their stories. Some were small, some were serious. But they all pointed to the same thing. This wasn't about landscaping or mailboxes or what kind of truck you drove. It was about control. And what happens when control goes unchecked? The attorney sat quietly through most of it, taking notes. At the end he said, "You all have more power than you think. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." That stuck with me. Because for the first time, it felt like we weren't just reacting to a problem, we were shaping what came next. And while it was slow and clumsy and far from perfect, it was progress. The committee meetings became a regular thing. Once a week, same chairs in the same circle, but the tone kept shifting. At first, the board members were stiff, guarded. They listened, but only enough to say they had. But week by week, that changed. The more stories they heard, the more it became clear, this wasn't just one incident gone too far. This was the result of years of unchecked authority, vague rules, and people being too afraid or too tired to fight back. The HOA attorney started bringing printed copies of the updated bylaws draft to each meeting. Big chunks were getting crossed out. Whole paragraphs rewritten. Terms like compliance patrols were removed entirely. A new rule was proposed. No HOA volunteer would be allowed to approach a resident directly without written notice and approval from the full board. Another rule banned physical enforcement of any kind. Seemed obvious, but apparently it had never been officially written down before. The best part? These changes weren't coming from the board. They were coming from us, the homeowners. The ones who lived in the houses, parked in the driveways, dealt with the stress of unfair letters and sudden fines. The power was shifting, not because someone gave it to us, but because we showed up, spoke up, and didn't back down. One meeting, a quiet older man named Mr. Harris shared that he'd been fined 3 times in 1 month for weeds growing through the cracks in his sidewalk. He was 73, lived alone, and had recently recovered from back surgery. He'd sent a letter to the HOA explaining his situation. No one ever responded. Just more fines. The room went silent. That moment hit hard. Not just because of what happened to him, but because it was so common. People weren't being treated like neighbors. They were being treated like rule breakers. Strangers. And the worst part? Most of them just stayed quiet and paid the fees, thinking it wasn't worth the fight. But now, things were different. We helped Mr. Harris get his fines reversed. We voted to create a grace request form, something simple for people going through tough times, so they could request a pause on citations without begging for sympathy. A small change, maybe, but one that felt human. And that's what had been missing all along. Back at home, the video of the original incident was still making the rounds. We didn't post it publicly, but someone had shared it in a few private groups, and from there it spread. Messages came in from people outside our neighborhood, some from other states. Folks who had dealt with overreaching HOAs. People who got fined for having solar panels, or for flying the wrong kind of flag, or for painting their front door the non-approved shade of brown. One message came from a guy in Arizona who said, "I thought I was crazy until I saw your video. I showed it to my wife. We're joining our HOA board next month." That's when it really started to sink in. What happened in our driveway wasn't just about us. It was a mirror, reflecting a much bigger issue. People everywhere were tired of being pushed around by organizations that were supposed to serve them, not scare them. But it wasn't just about pushing back. It was about rebuilding trust. You can't run a community on fear. You can't fix broken systems with silence. So we kept showing up, kept speaking out, kept listening to the people who'd been quiet for too long. One afternoon, after the 6th or 7th committee meeting, the board president pulled me aside. He looked tired. Not in a defeated way, more like someone who'd finally realized how far things had drifted. "I didn't know it was this bad," he said. "I really didn't." I believed him. Not because he was trying to cover himself, but because I could see it in his face. He wasn't a bad person. Just someone who hadn't been listening until it was impossible not to. He asked me if I thought the HOA could be fixed. I told him yes. But not by going back to how things were. It would take more voices, more eyes, more people willing to say, "This doesn't feel right," and not be ignored. He nodded, then walked back into the clubhouse. And for the first time, I didn't see him as the enemy. Just another neighbor trying to figure out how to do better. About a week after that conversation, something unexpected showed up in our mailbox. It wasn't a notice, not a warning, not even a bill. It was a handwritten card. Simple white envelope, no official stamp. Just our names in blue ink on the front. Inside was a note from the elderly couple 2 streets over, people we'd seen in passing but never really spoken to. They wrote, "We watched everything from our porch that day. We were scared for her. We didn't know what to do. Thank you both for standing up. We feel safer now." That small card did something none of the meetings or bylaws ever could. It reminded us this whole thing wasn't just about rules and power. It was about neighbors. Real people living next to each other, day after day, hoping they could feel safe in their own driveways. It made everything that had happened feel personal again. Not political. Not legal. Just human. More little signs kept showing up like that. A young couple dropped off cookies and a thank you note. Another family waved us down while walking their dog, just to say they appreciated what we did. It was strange at first, because we hadn't done anything heroic. We just refused to let something wrong slide by. But apparently, that was enough to shake something loose in everyone else. One evening, we were sitting on the porch watching the sun go down, when my wife turned and said, "Can you believe this all started with a parking space?" I laughed, but she was right. A parking space. A petty citation. 2 men with clipboards and too much ego. And now here we were, part of a slow but steady movement that had turned this quiet neighborhood into something a little more awake, a little more connected. The HOA board was still there. They still handled landscaping budgets and pool keys. But now they sent out monthly newsletters with actual transparency. Every decision had names and votes listed. Every meeting had an open mic section. The patrols? Gone. Replaced with a suggestion box and a new community liaison system where concerns could be raised, calmly, respectfully, and most importantly, without intimidation. There was even talk of organizing a community block party. Something simple like food trucks, music, maybe a bounce house for the kids. One of the same board members who once backed the patrol system was now pushing for it, saying, "We need something that brings us together, not just rules that push us apart." I don't know if that party will happen. But the fact that people are even thinking that way now? That says everything. As the season changed and fall came in, we watched the neighborhood shift with it. Yards got decorated with pumpkins and hay bales. Kids rode bikes up and down the street without being watched suspiciously. And that truck, our truck, was still parked right in the driveway where it had always been. No notes. No warnings. No one calling it an eyesore. Funny how something can go from being called a violation to just being normal once people stop trying to control everything. One afternoon, we spotted the former HOA enforcer, the shorter guy who had pushed my wife. He was walking alone, no clipboard this time, no sunglasses. Just him, his hands in his jacket pockets, walking slow. We didn't say anything. He glanced at us, then looked away. We didn't need an apology anymore. We weren't waiting for that. What mattered was that he wasn't doing it to anyone else. People change. Sometimes it takes getting caught. Sometimes it takes a whole community holding up a mirror. But it happens. A few houses had "No HOA overreach" signs in the windows now. Not aggressive. Just quiet reminders. Even small things like that had become symbols of something bigger. A sense that people were finally drawing the line. Not to be defiant, but to protect what mattered. And in the end, it didn't feel like we won anything. It felt like we woke something up. Something that had been asleep for too long while the rules piled up and the warnings went unchecked. It didn't take lawsuits. It didn't take shouting. Just one moment that went too far, and 2 people who decided not to let it slide.